May 633 AD. The vast plains of Mesopotamia are still smoking from two crushing defeats. The once mighty Sassanid Empire has lost its frontier guards in chains and watched its heavy infantry bleed out along the Euphrates. For Emperor Yazdegerd III in Ctesiphon, this is no longer a border skirmish, it's an existential threat. The smaller Arab force under Khalid ibn al-Walid has punched straight into the empire's heartland. The Persians, exhausted from decades of war with Rome, but still commanding massive resources, refuse to collapse. They mobilize not one army, but two. One to lure Khalid in, the other to slam the door shut behind him. It's a textbook hammer-and-anvil trap at a place called Walaja. But Khalid is no ordinary commander. He sees the danger coming. He chooses speed over caution, and he prepares a response that will stun military historians for centuries. What clever trap did the Persians set at Walaja? How exactly did Khalid uncover it in time? And what single hidden move allowed a smaller force to turn certain defeat into total encirclement? Stay with me. This is the story of how brains outfought sheer numbers in the desert sands. The Sassanid Empire refused to crumble. Exhausted from years of war with the Romans, yes, but still a superpower with vast resources and manpower. Emperor Yazdegerd III in Ctesiphon knew one more defeat could open the road to his capital. So he didn't send another single army. He unleashed two. First came Andarzaghar, a battle-hardened frontier governor who understood Arab speed and mobility better than most Persian commanders. His orders were clear: march to Walaja, a strategic spot where the Tigris and Euphrates draw close, forming a natural choke point between the rivers. There he would dig in on a wide plain backed by low ridges, perfect terrain to neutralize lighter forces with heavy infantry and sheer weight of numbers. Medieval chroniclers report Andarzaghar commanded a large army, with estimates ranging from 30 to 50,000 men. His role? Act as bait, hold Khalid in place. But the real killer was coming from the north. A second force, drawn from the empire's elite reserves, marched under General Bahman. Once Khalid committed at Walaja, Bahman would strike from the rear, trapping the Arabs between hammer and anvil. It was a classic strategy: divide, pin, destroy. On paper, unbeatable. The Persians had every advantage, or so they believed. But empires don't fall without a fight, and this was their smartest move yet. Khalid ibn al-Walid never fought blind. His network of scouts, often called the Eyes of the Desert in historical accounts, tracked every movement of the two approaching Persian armies. He saw the trap forming clearly. If Andarzaghar and Bahman united, their combined strength would overwhelm his smaller force. Medieval chroniclers report Khalid gathered his commanders and declared they had to strike the first army before the second could even reach the field. Ignoring the reinforcements marching from the north, he ordered an all-out forced march across the burning desert, pushing his men to the edge of collapse to cover impossible distances in record time. Speed was their only weapon, and they used it like a blade. By the time they reached Walaja, Andarzaghar's larger army was already deployed on the open plain, backed by those low ridges, confident that help was coming and that the Arabs were walking into a kill zone. Khalid's troops were exhausted, outnumbered, and facing perfect defensive ground. Everything pointed to disaster. But Khalid had already spotted one detail on the battlefield that the Persians overlooked completely, one that would flip the entire fight. The Arab force arrived at Walaja to face Andarzagar's much larger army already in position on a wide, flat plain backed by low ridges that the Persians viewed as perfect protection for their rear. Medieval chroniclers describe estimates of 30 to 50,000 Persian troops, heavily armored and formed up with confidence, certain their numbers and chosen ground would grind down the lighter, exhausted Arabs. To Andarzagar, those ridges were a wall against retreat or surprise. To Khalid, they were something else entirely, a hidden opportunity. The night before the battle, under complete darkness, Khalid pulled off one of the boldest moves in military history. He detached around 4,000 cavalry, nearly half his mounted strength, under two trusted commanders, and sent them on a wide, secret ride around the Persian flanks, using ravines and shadows to stay unseen until they positioned themselves behind those very ridges. Their orders were strict: stay hidden no matter what happened on the field until Khalid's signal. At dawn, the Persians saw only a smaller, dust-worn Arab army with a thin center and weak-looking flanks, exactly the illusion Khalid wanted. Persian drums thundered as their heavy infantry advanced in disciplined ranks. The clash was fierce from the start, Arab spears and swords holding against the armored wall, but for hours it remained a brutal stalemate, the Persians pushing forward step by step, wearing down their opponents. The ridges behind them still looked safe. But what if they weren't? For hours, the battle at Walaja raged in brutal deadlock. Arab infantry holding their ground against the relentless push of the heavier Persian lines, each side locked in a grinding test of endurance as the Persians inched forward, believing their superior numbers and armor would eventually break the exhausted Arabs. Khalid, commanding from the center, watched every shift closely and then issued an order that seemed suicidal. A controlled retreat in the middle, his troops giving ground slowly while still fighting fiercely, bending their line backward into a deep crescent shape that invited the Persians to pour everything into the opening. To Andarzagar and his officers, this looked like collapse. The Arabs were cracking under pressure, so they abandoned caution, swinging their wings inward and crowding their ranks shoulder to shoulder to deliver the killing blow deep into the pocket Khalid had created. The Persian army compressed into a dense mass, focused only on the enemy ahead and oblivious to the ridges behind them. That was the moment Khalid had waited for. He raised his sword, the signal. From behind those ridges erupted the thunder of 4,000 hidden Arab cavalry, cresting the hills and charging down like an avalanche straight into the unprotected Persian rear, while at the exact same instant Khalid's retreating center halted, locked shields, and surged forward with renewed force. What had been a stalemate flipped into complete encirclement, a double envelopment where a smaller force surrounded a larger one, the Persians trapped on all sides with no room to maneuver or escape. Panic spread rapidly through their ranks. Medieval chroniclers describe how the disciplined imperial army dissolved into chaos as soldiers were pressed too tightly to fight effectively, and the battle turned decisively against them, with few managing to break out. When the dust finally settled at Walaja, Khalid ibn al-Walid had achieved a stunning victory. Medieval chroniclers report that his smaller force not only routed Andarzaghur's larger army, but encircled and overwhelmed it so completely that few Persians escaped the battlefield, leaving behind immense quantities of weapons, armor, gold, and supplies that far exceeded what his tribesmen had ever seen. Andarzaghur himself managed to flee with only a handful of guards, but historical accounts describe how he lost his way in the deep desert and perished from thirst, a harsh end for a commander who had underestimated his opponent. Khalid stood over the field with his exhausted warriors, simple men far from home who had just pulled off a maneuver that military historians still study today as a masterclass in turning defensive terrain against the enemy. This was the third Persian army destroyed in rapid succession, proving once again that speed, deception, and precise timing could overcome raw numbers. Yet the war was far from over. The second Persian force under Bahman remained intact, and just days away at Elias, the empire was desperately gathering every available fighter for a final stand, not for conquest anymore, but for survival. Victory at Walaja was sweet, but the real test and a far bloodier clash waited just ahead. If you want to see how Khalid faced that desperate last gamble, subscribe now and hit the bell. The next battle changes everything.